I just want to give you a little bit of vocabulary for anyone who might not know some of the words. Because remember, adding vocabulary is boosting your brain power. So some of the words that you'll hear in this chapter today are inquisitive, which means to question something or to be curious about it. Intervened, which means to come between or prevent something. Initiating is to start something. Caressed is to stroke or touch gently. Obscured means that something is blocking something else. Protruded means to stick out. And elite is like a superior group or a higher quality of something that's special. So, no, I cannot see you on the other side here. I can just see that your name is popping up. So if you're curious if I'm watching you, I'm not. You're watching me. So as we're listening today too, I want you to notice that I introduce a couple more characters. But in addition to that, kind of pay attention to what those characters are like, because in a book, characters aren't usually all the same. Yeah, otherwise, it'd be really boring. So looking for those intricacies, those special characteristics about them, makes them come alive for you. So with that being said, I'm going to stop and I'm going to read. And while I'm reading today, I'm probably going to stop a couple of times just to point some things out. When we left yesterday, remember that Jamie was upset because Atticus is going to be sold this coming weekend, and she doesn't want that to happen. So she has come up with a plan. So maybe today we'll find out what that plan is. Hello, John. I'm just starting. I see you popping in there. Let me go to chapter 3. And chapter 3, Wednesday, is called Preparations. Want to play Wii with me? Jamie slammed shut the drawer on her dresser and turned toward her bedroom door. Only Haley's blonde head was poking around the frame. Now remember, Haley is her little sister. Nah, she answered. I have some things to do before I go over to the kennel to help feed the dogs. Haley's lower lip puffed out. What things? You haven't played with me all week. Jamie hated it when Haley whined. It was times like these when she really noticed the 7-year difference in their ages. I promise I'll play after dinner. Haley darted into the room, spread her arms like she was flying, and landed a belly flop on the clothes Jamie had just laid on her bed. She began to roll, flailing her arms and legs as she did. T-shirts and worn jean shorts flew into messy heaps on the polished hardwood floor. Haley, stop! You're making a mess! Jamie scooped up the clothing and shoved it into her backpack. Haley sat up on the bed. Are you going to a sleepover? Jamie stopped. A sleepover? Yeah, you're packing clothes. Haley pointed to the leg of the jean shorts that hung over the side of the maroon bag. Jamie groaned inwardly. How stupid could she be? These are in case I get a lot of dog hair on me at the kennel. I don't want you to have an allergic reaction when I come home. Sorry, I lost my place. The excuse sounded good, but as soon as Haley tipped her head and squinted in her typical inquisitive fashion, Jamie knew she'd made a tactical error. Why do you need more than one? She dropped her feet over the side of the bed and slid to the floor. At the same time, she reached for the backpack. Let me see what you got in there. Jamie twisted away. Don't you have something better to do than snoop in my room? How many of you have brothers or sisters and sometimes you feel like this? Maybe it's a friend who comes over and they're kind of snooping around in your room. I'm not snooping. I want you to play with me. There was that whine again. She adored her little sister, but right now she had urgent things on her mind, and playing a video game wasn't one of them. I promise I'll play later. Haley lifted her chin in a challenge. Cross your heart, hope to die? Jamie's teeth ground together, and her voice came out more forcefully than she intended. Haley, don't ever say that again. How many times had Jamie used those words to tease her dad into making a promise? How many times had he actually chanted the last part, hope to die? They were words with a new meaning to her, and she hated them. Her little sister's lower lip quivered, and tears sprang to her eyes. I didn't mean it for real. Before Jamie could hug her, Haley raced from the room. A moment later, her bedroom door slammed. I can see that Lizzie is agreeing with some of the things happening in here. Jamie closed her eyes and waited for the inevitable. "What's going on up there, ladies?" their mother called up the stairs. "A little misunderstanding, Mom." "I'll take care of it. You know I don't like doors being slammed." Her words echoed off the hall walls. Use words, not force, to resolve your disputes. There was no way Jamie was letting Haley off the hook on this one. That was Haley. "Work it out," her mother ordered. "Already done," Jamie called back. Jamie wondered if her mother handled student issues that way. She was the guidance counselor at the high school. Occasionally at dinner, she told stories about fights she had to break up. Since she was average in size, many of the boys, who were practically men, towered over her. Jamie tried to capture the reaction if they were in the middle of an all-out brawl, and her mother intervened with, "Boys, use words, not force, to resolve your dispute." Did they stare at her in disbelief, laugh hysterically, or did it actually work to break the tension? "Is Charlotte picking you up for work at the kennel?" Her mother's question brought her back. "No, I'm riding my bike over." Jamie finished putting the shorts and t-shirts in the backpack. Then she rummaged in her closet and found an old blanket she kept for those rare times when Atticus stayed in their house when Charlotte went away. She stuffed that in the front pocket of the oversized backpack the best she could and zipped it. She'd have to be careful that her mother didn't have the opportunity to question her like Haley did. With only 2 days to go, she had to get everything in place as quickly as possible. And without anyone noticing what she was doing, she had to do it all quietly. She slung one of the backpack straps over her shoulder and started down the hall, stopping at Haley's door. "Hey, Peanut," she said, using the nickname their father had given Haley because she was so tiny when she was born. "I'm sorry I snapped at you. I'll see you when I get home from the kennel. We'll play Wii then, okay?" There was no response, but she could hear Haley's sing-songy play voice. Jamie pictured the 6-year-old playing with her beanie babies, creating little worlds for them. It usually took her all of a couple of minutes to get over her anger, and since this really was a minor incident, it might have been even less time. Satisfied that she'd fulfilled her mother's directive to work it out, she bounded down the stairs. On her way to the kitchen, she snatched an apple from the bowl on the counter. She was in luck. Her mother was in another room. She opened the cupboard below the sink, pulled out a handful of the plastic grocery bags they stored there, and shoved all except for 2 into the side pocket of her backpack. She gently closed that door and opened the cupboard overhead that held mixing bowls. She grabbed the largest white plastic bowl and a medium-sized metal one and quickly shoved both into the plastic bags she'd kept separate. Every nerve in her body tingled. Even her hair felt electrified. She tiptoed to the doorway and peered down the hall. There was still no sign of her mother. She hurried to the pantry just past the refrigerator. Tucked toward the back, on the bottom shelf, was a partially used bag of the dry dog food they kept for Atticus. She stuffed that into another plastic bag, as well as 5 cans of its moist food. She hoped she wouldn't need that much, but it was better to be prepared just in case. She slinked out of the pantry feeling like a thief. She'd never done something so sneaky, but desperate situations called for desperate measures, as her grandfather often said. He had little sayings for everything. "I'm heading out, Mom," she called down the hallway. Her mother's voice came from the area of her office. "Love you, honey. See you for dinner. Be careful on the road." Yep. And just like that, Jamie shot out the door on her way to fulfilling step 1 of her plan. I bet you're curious about what her plan is, too. Guilt squeezed her stomach. For a moment, she considered abandoning the idea. She couldn't imagine how it'd all end up, but for right now, this was all she could think of to save Atticus. Jamie forced herself to pedal slowly away from the house. The heavy plastic bags with the bowls and dog food were hanging from one handlebar, making it difficult to keep the front wheel straight. As soon as she rounded the corner on Ford Road, she pushed her bike into the highest gear and pumped as hard as she could. If her mother happened to talk to Charlotte while she was en route, Charlotte might notice the delay in her arrival. Then there could be questions. No, there would be questions. Forced single parenthood had turned her mother into an ultra-protective parent with an overactive imagination. Another little stab of guilt hit Jamie with the unfairness of her thought. Her mom had lost her husband, who was her best friend, in that fire just months ago. It made sense that she'd worry about losing someone else she loved. And now Jamie was initiating her plan for exactly the same reason. She didn't want to lose someone she loved. She couldn't even consider the heartbreak of losing Atticus. A warm wind caressed her face, increasing in intensity as she pedaled faster. There were 5 houses on their street, and they were far enough apart that he had to shout to be heard from one to the other. The very last house on the street, a big white farmhouse, belonged to her grandparents. It was the house where her father and his siblings had grown up. When she reached it, she cut up the long dirt driveway that ran along the side of the house. The driveway then made a circle past a large shed that her grandfather used as his woodworking shop. A canopy of catalpa trees that lined the driveway like sentries shielded her from the sun. Her grandparents' tan Chevy Impala was parked at the top part of the circle near the sidewalk leading to the back porch. She hoped they weren't where they could see her. Jamie cruised past the house, then the barn, and onto a barely visible path that ran along the edge of 2 vast fields that were separated by a stream. The shallow water snaked along the winding narrow bed. Just a few weeks before, the banks had barely contained the stream that was swollen from the spring thaw. Since then, an unusual dry weather pattern had sucked the moisture from the earth and vegetation, causing many of the plants to snap easily under her bike tire. Tall grass and weeds nearly obscured the path, but Jamie knew it well and followed it until she came to the tree line that marked the beginning of the wooded area. Like black and white, the fields and woods were in stark contrast to each other. The fields were bright and sunny, but she knew the woods were darker and much cooler. She applied the brakes to her bike, dismounted, and wheeled it along the edge of the woods until she saw what she was looking for. I'm going to stop for just a second because I want to talk to you about using context clues when you don't understand what a word means. If you look at what's happening around that sentence and what the characters are doing, and then look at how the word is used, quite often you can figure out what that word means. For example, when I said that the fields and woods were in stark contrast to each other, I then went on to describe that the fields were bright and sunny, but it was dark in the woods. So that's contrasting the two, and that's how you can figure out what those words mean. A small metal rod, once painted blue, but now showing only flecks of the color, stuck out a foot from the trunk of a large oak tree about 7 feet up. As teenagers, her father and Uncle Craig had put it there as a way to mark the entrance to the next path she had to follow. She rolled her bicycle into the woods a few feet and then leaned it against a tree that had fallen years before. The plastic bag with the dog food and bowls dropped to the ground with a loud rattle. A chipmunk popped its head out of a small cavity of the tree and then jumped into the dry bark. His nose twitched, and he flicked his thick tail before scurrying through the dried leaves that covered the forest floor. Jamie hitched up the pack on her back, picked up the plastic bag, and moved deeper into the woods. With each step she took, the leaves crackled under her feet. It had been almost a month since the area had seen any significant rain. It was unusual for the end of May. She'd noticed the warning on the sign outside the firehouse that alerted the townspeople to the dry conditions which raised the fire danger. It was the sign her father used to change after receiving reports from the state fire marshal. Now her uncle handled the duty. Readjusting her backpack, she looked for the next clue to lead her in the right direction. She scanned the area and then saw it. A large rock protruded from the ground between 2 pine trees. She walked between the trees and continued walking straight, trying hard not to get off track when stepping around the trees that blocked her path. Next, she came to the rusted coffee can nailed to the bark of another tree. How many years had that been there? She wondered if her dad or uncle had ever had to replace it. Beyond that, deeper into the woods, she found the 2 square blocks of wood cut from the end of a 2x4, nailed to a tree and pointing her in another direction. To the untrained eye, most of these clues would have gone unnoticed, but Jamie's father had brought her in and shared the secret starting when Jamie was 7. He died before Haley was old enough to become one of the elite who knew about this special place. Now, forever, the memory and experience belonged to just Jamie and her dad. She continued following the subtle clues for 15 minutes until finally she came to it. Tucked in a large stand of pine trees was the old cabin. She hadn't been here since her dad died, and other than a large branch that had fallen onto the roof, it all looked the same, frozen in time. Her dad and Uncle Craig had built the cabin out of scrap wood left over from their father's woodworking projects. She suspected her grandfather had also supplied perfectly fine pieces as well. Many of the planks on the sides were full length and still in decent shape 25 years after they'd been nailed together. The entire cabin, now a very dull reddish gray, was a single room about the size of a large living room. They had put in a glass window on each long side of the cabin and one in the back. A smaller window, barely as large as Jamie's face, was in the middle of the door on the front. The land next to the cabin sloped 100 feet or so down to another stream bed, this one much larger than the one that divided the fields on her way here. Farther up there was a waterfall Mother Nature had cut into the shale, but Jamie wasn't able to see it from the cabin. She only knew about it because her father had taken her there to wade in it on hot summer days when they'd ventured here. A few times they had camped out in the cabin, just the two of them, because her mother didn't like the woods. "Wade, what about snakes and wolves and bears?" her mother would ask in all seriousness. Jamie's father, who told everyone he'd imported her from the city, would chuckle at her fear. "You mean lions and tigers and bears? Oh my," he would tease. Then he'd grab her mother and twirl her around in the middle of the living room before setting her back on her feet and hugging her tight. "You know I won't let anything happen to Jamie, Melissa. Besides, in reality, a few spiders will be our biggest threat." Then he'd plant a big loud kiss on his wife's lips, and Jamie would always make a big display of pretending to gag at their affection. Jamie closed her eyes, and the whole exchange was alive in her mind for a few seconds. What she wouldn't give to experience it all again right now. If only. She stopped the thought before it went any farther. "The what-if game won't get you anything but heartaches and headaches," her grandfather often said. But it didn't stop her from often wondering what if her father hadn't gone out to California to help fight the massive forest fire last October. What if she'd accepted the lead role in the school play? Then her father might have stayed to see every performance instead of just the first one. She shook her head as if to chase the thoughts away. If you're always looking behind you, then you might miss something wonderful ahead of you. It was another one of her grandfather's sayings. Right now, looking ahead meant saving Atticus from being sold. It was all up to her. The rusty hinges on the cabin door creaked when she opened it. Sun filtered through the leafy trees and lit the inside. Shafts of light sliced through tiny cracks in the worn walls, creating a random light show on the packed dirt floor. Part of a root of a nearby tree poked up through the dirt in the far corner. Along one wall, her father and uncle had built 2 crude bed frames from wood. On another wall, they had brought up an old discarded kitchen cabinet and secured it halfway up. Jamie removed the bowls from the plastic bag, set them on the floor, then put the dog food in the cupboard. Next, she took Atticus's blanket from her backpack and laid it on one of the bed frames. A row of thick nails had been hammered into the front wall. On those nails, Jamie hung the clothes Haley had seen her packing. She shivered, not sure if it was a reaction to the coolness in the cabin or to the reality of what she was planning. Glancing around, she made a mental list of what other things she'd need to sneak out here. Bottles of water, matches, wood, a couple more blankets, flashlights, a Kong for Atticus, peanut butter, dog treats. Would she remember all these things? She picked up her empty backpack. "Well, Atticus," she said to herself, "I hope this works for both of our sakes." So you can see that Jamie has a little plot in her head, and I'm thinking you might be guessing what it is now. I want to go back because I want to just mention one of those sayings that her grandfather brought up. When she remembered him saying, if you're always looking behind you, then you might miss something wonderful ahead of you. What do you think that means? What is he trying to tell Jamie in everyday life when she's thinking about what used to be and what happened before instead of looking ahead? What is his message? Also, when you're reading, like I said a couple of days ago, if you close your eyes and you listen to the descriptions, a lot of times it will take you there. So try that sometime. Just sit back and relax and close your eyes and let yourself be in the story. You might even become the character. Who knows? When she's pedaling fast, maybe you'll start to run out of breath too. That's all for today. Chapter 4 will be, today is Friday. That means Monday is our next day for Chapter 4 with Finding Atticus. I hope you have a good weekend. Everyone stay safe. And if you have any questions, make sure that you add those questions down. I'm going to post this on the chapter by chapter page in that group. But you can also email me at windsweptpublishing@gmail.com, and I'll answer questions there as well. Thank you, Terry, for watching. I see you there, and Penny, and June, and Anne. So nice to see all of you. I'm glad that you joined us, and I'll hopefully see you on Monday. Have a good weekend.